Bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening, Fade to Black. How you doing? Today is Wednesday. That's right. It's Wednesday. We're halfway through the week. Tomorrow is my Friday. So it's like your Thursday for me today on Wednesday. That's because it's February 28th. We got 29 days. Any leap year babies in the chat? I mean, what's that like? I mean, what is that like? What do you do the rest of the time? I'm just saying, tomorrow is February 29th, and what a strange feeling. Today is Wednesday, February 28th. All right. Tonight on the show, he's back. Dane Wigington is with us. We're going to be discussing a very smart and sobering subject, and that is global climate intervention. And so it's time to learn something tonight, and you're going to do that right along with me. It's always great to be with Dane. So we're going to do all of that. Tomorrow night, Dr. Paul Sutter is with us, and he's a PhD. He's a doctor. He's a PhD. He's an astronomer. And now, yes, that's what he does. And tomorrow night, we're going to be discussing astronomy, science, what's out there, exoplanets, the universe, physics, astrophysics, all of that. But what does society know? And how do we get to that information? Is anything being held back? I don't. Tomorrow night, we're going to get to those answers. It's going to be a great show. Dr. Paul Sutter tomorrow night. But tonight, Dane Wigington is with us. Now, it's very simple. He's a researcher. He is the administrator for the website geoengineeringwatch.org. Very important website. The links for that are below over on our website and throughout social media. He's the executive producer for the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary, The Dimming. He has a background in solar energy. We're going to be talking about that tonight as well. He's a former employee of Bechtel Power Corporation, and he has dedicated his life over 20 years to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt them. We are going to discuss all of that and much more tonight with Dane. And I'm going to get straight to it and say, welcome back to Fade to Black, Dane Wigington. He's right there. How you doing, Dane?
As good as can be, Jimmy. Thank you very much for your eyes to the sky, for your attention on what too few people know about, and even fewer understand the gravity of the threat posed by it.
Well, you know, Dane, I've done many interviews with you over the years, and the one thing that always I come back to with you is don't ever stop doing what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, when I say those words, right, keep rolling that rock uphill, that's exactly what you're doing. And when I say it's a sobering subject, it's just that. But you have to keep your foot on the gas, don't you?
Absolutely. And time is definitely not on our side. Too many people in society, Jimmy, have been taught, trained, and programmed to believe that Earth changes take place over millennia or at minimum centuries. But we're in completely uncharted territory with the amount of damage that's been done to the planet in countless forms, climate engineering being the single greatest factor, but by no means the only factor. But this is a very, very non-linear equation, and that's what people don't understand. So if we don't deal with the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, all of their causes and concerns soon become moot points, don't they?
They do. They do. And before we get started, you also host. You've got your own radio program and YouTube channel, and you've gone from. I've got something in my eye, and a tear just came out. So let's say the tear is for the planet. If anybody saw that, just kind of dripped on my face. What is it like to go from activists and invited onto programs to speak about this to then be able to host and guide your own programming? Do you approach it differently?
Well, our weekly broadcast, Global Alert News, is 1 hour commercial free. We're on stations throughout the country. We pay for it all out of pocket, so it's non-political. As I know you are non-political as well, Jimmy. I salute you for that. And no commercial interruptions at all. So we pay for it all out of pocket. All our airtime is paid for out of pocket. So it's simply an attempt to try and to sound the alarm before the moment of impact. And I want to stress that too. If we compare the human race to the person sitting on the tree branch on the wrong side of where he's making the cut, and everything seems stable until that moment where the branch breaks and the limb falls, and that's the moment we're at. And the normalcy bias is incredible at this late hour, given the severity of what's already happening around the globe and the immediacy of impact that's coming from many directions. Jimmy, the normalcy bias is absolutely mind-numbing.
Now, there could be, I'm saying could be, there could be a couple of different things going on at the same time. Certainly, the subject is also there too in the media. And so the presenting it, but then you have to ask what the cause is, or if there's multiple causes going on at the same time. And what I'm referring to is it part of it the sun, right? Is it just what happens in a solar cycle, in the life of a star system? Is it man-made with just pollutants from the Industrial Revolution forward? Or is there something more sinister going on in the background where there are forces that are affecting change? Or is it all three at the same time?
Really important question. Thank you. And we can absolutely, statistically, mathematically, and factually, if you use the premise of Occam's razor, we can say that the earth changes that are happening right now are not an effect of cosmological occurrences, but a direct result of human activity. And that includes climate engineering. That includes every other form of human damage to the planet. We're actually in the elliptical phase of Earth's orbit. We should be entering a cooling phase on the planet, but we are not, because the amount of thermal energy buildup that the human race has caused. Climate engineering, again, being a part of that, Jimmy. The stated purpose, for your listeners that don't know: solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement. Those are the science terms for the spraying of light scattering aerosols into our skies. And anybody that's not clinically blind should be able to see this going on in our skies, Jimmy, and know it's not condensation, as most people have been led to believe. And we have film footage to back that up. So there's no debate in that arena. But these particles can and do create short-term toxic daytime cooling at the expense of an even worse overall warming of the planet. Jimmy, it's like the pharmaceutical commercial you see that take this for that symptom. And by the way, here's the side effects. And you wonder who in the world would take that. But that's the mentality. And I want to make clear that there's nothing benevolent in the climate engineering operations. Nothing. Although our military personnel are being told they're doing something benevolent, that could not be further from the truth. This is weather and biological warfare, period. So again, if we look at cosmological, cyclical, anything, it does not plug into the equation we have now, which is, if I can give an example I've given on my broadcast before, to claim it's anything other than what we've done to the planet, including climate engineering at the top of that list, it would be like finding a body in a crosswalk that had been run over, beaten, stabbed, shot, blown up, burnt, and then claiming that person died of natural causes. That's not the case here. So we've been very poor stewards of the planet, but climate engineering, playing God with the weather, Jimmy, that is the epitome of human insanity.
I spoke to my mom a couple of times this week, and she lives in Columbus, Ohio. And just like any phone call with your parents, the weather comes up. It's just what you do. It's what you do with your parents, right? So I said, "So what's your winter been like?" And she goes, "You know what? We've had the craziest 4 or 5 years of weather out here." I said, "Well, what's going on?" She goes, "A couple of days ago, it was freezing. Today, it's 65." She goes, "It's in the middle of winter, and it's not." And now my mom, who knows nothing about any of this stuff, right? She just doesn't. It's not in her wheelhouse. But you only have to go outside and look around to know that we are definitely going through some very, very strange weather patterns. And now the question is, those are the facts, but you have to get behind the facts, don't you? And get to the why.
Very important subject, weather whiplash, which has now become the norm. And these flash cooldowns are not nature. They're patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding for weather modification. They're seeding cloud moisture with endothermic reacting elements. Those are energy absorbing elements. They're literally transforming, Jimmy, what should be liquid precipitation into frozen precipitation. And for those that don't think that's possible, they simply haven't examined the science. Science is absolutely, inarguably clear. And let's look at the first aid kit that many people have sitting on their shelf for 20 years with a cold pack in it. At room temperature, 20 years, you mix those chemicals together, you have ice instantly. This is the same process on a scale that's unimaginable. Again, these are patented processes. Chinese government openly announced they were doing it, Jimmy, engineering snowstorms over Beijing. Popular Science covered it, MSNBC, Fox News, everybody covered it. But if you bring it up here, suddenly you're a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, and that's simply the programmed response of the factless and the fearful, their final response. So the bottom line is these flash cooldowns, which are getting way worse by the day, literally 80 degrees sometimes. In Denver, last 5 years running, we've seen 80, 85 degrees to single digits in less than 24 hours. And we're seeing 50-degree swings now less than 24 hours across the country. And the climate engineering covert actors, and I'll leave it with this, and that's what they are, the so-called meteorologists at Weather Channel, Weather Nation, and CNN, all the rest. They're covering the tracks of the climate engineers, trying to explain these flash cooldowns away as if there's something natural, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So we have very little honor, Jimmy, in the system. Everybody's saying whatever they're told to say for their paychecks and pensions, but the engineered cooldown, engineered winter, geoengineeringwatch.org is the only source trying to expose that core factor in climate engineering operations.
Okay. So the question would be, and we've got a lot to cover tonight, Dane, but, and the list is long. Let's start at the top. Why control the weather?
I would answer that with, why wouldn't they control the weather? Of course they would. Of course they are. It's historically documented. If we go all the way back to Project Popeye in Vietnam, that's the name of the U.S. climate modification operations that were so successful at controlling precipitation that by the 70s, there were international INMOD treaties passed, environmental modification treaties, forbidding weather manipulation in wartime. Not that anybody pays attention to those treaties, but we have patents, Jimmy, going back well over 100 years. If people search geoengineeringwatch.org extensive list of patents, the human race, those who control it and pull the levers, have always wanted to control the weather. And if we look at the beginning of this is very telling to answer your question, and people can see it with their own eyes. The beginning of my weekly broadcast, again, Global Alert News, it's posted also on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. The first 20 seconds is film footage of President Lyndon Johnson in 1962. It's on film, on the record, of him ranting like a lunatic, stating that we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then. And here's the answer to your question, Jimmy. And he who controls the weather controls the world. This is the crown jewel covert weapon of the power structure with which they can and are bringing populations to their knees in countries all over the world without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault. Control the weather, control the food supply, control the population.
In the last, I was going to say last 3 months, I could say in the last 3 days, you can find really crazy weather news throughout the media. And one of the things that I'm seeing repeated, and I saw it again today, are ski resorts closing. And I just got back from Peru, and I was in the Andes, and you can drive through and look at the glaciers, right? Well, one of the archaeologists that I was with in Peru pointed at this one mountain. He said, I forget the number, Dane, you have to excuse me, but he said something like there used to be 7 glaciers there. Now there's 1. And I was like, really? And he said, it just looks different. It's not the same. And you can get the glacier reports just about daily in the media. This is out in our faces. There's certainly been a shift in weather patterns.
You're completely correct. And this is where people are so polarized. They're so well trained to hate Al Gore and any environmental group that they simply take the opposite position out of spite. And that's a mistake. So yes, we have immense hypocrisy in the global warming community, if you will. Al Gore owning stocks in the companies he claims to be fighting. We have the environmental groups, so-called environmental groups, that will not address the climate engineering issue because they don't want to lose their nonprofit status. But is that not the epitome of hypocrisy, to not address the single most destructive human activity of all on the planet at this moment? Greatest and most immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm, and even then there's a connection with climate engineering. Not addressing that in order to keep their nonprofit status, that's criminal hypocrisy for us. So the bottom line is the planet's not just warming, it's in total meltdown. Climate engineering is making that worse, not better. And in regard to the ice deposits, and you're completely correct, I encourage people to watch a film called Chasing Ice, non-political film footage from the polar regions. And that film's about 10 years old. It's way worse now. But if people don't believe what they see with their own eyes, again, unbiased film footage that's beyond shocking, if they don't believe that, there's nothing I or anybody else can do to change their minds. And Jimmy, did you happen to see the water temperatures around Florida this year were 101 degrees?
I did. In fact, I was there. I was in Florida when the reports were coming in. I was in Miami. That the beaches had 100-degree water. It's like, what? Now we all want that sort of, but no, that's not what we want. And you have to ask yourself, what does that do to the fish? What does that do to the marine life? What does that do to the coral? What does that do to all of the flora and fauna that exist in the oceans when you're approaching 100-degree water?
Kills it. Simple. Kills it. And I've been on private expeditions. I've been a certified diver since I was 14. Had my dive master card for many years. I dove in South Seas, Fiji, New Zealand, Australia. I've seen some of the reefs before they were completely annihilated. And the kelp forests are even a bigger ecosystem than reefs. Many people don't realize that. Whole southern end of Australia is kelp forest, as the western coast of the U.S. once was. 95% of the kelp forest ecosystems are gone right now. We're hurtling toward what's known, Jimmy, as Canfield Ocean. That's a lifeless, stratified, oxygenless, superheated death zone. And that's exactly where we are headed. And people have no idea the ramifications of that. The oceans die, we die. And I'll leave it with this, just to equate the heat factor in this equation, going back to the 100+ degree water. A cubic meter of seawater contains 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. So what the oceans do, the planet must follow shortly afterward. Climate engineering, back to the pharmaceutical industrial complex mentality, hide the symptom even if you kill the host. And that's exactly the mentality behind climate engineering.
What is it that, okay, so I want to go, that was my first point in the layer. Let's go to the second point, the second question, which is when you say particulates, What is the main ingredient in this, and where and how are you finding it?
Really important question also. In fact, that's such a fundamental part of this equation that even if people want to pretend there's nothing wrong with the environment and that somehow it'll magically heal itself from anything we do to it, you can't ignore what we're breathing. So aluminum nanoparticles are a core element in this equation. It's in every precipitation test we take. And to put this into perspective, the smaller the particle we inhale, Jimmy, the more harmful it is. No official air testing anywhere is even looking for these nanoparticles. Can't find what you're not looking for, can you? So this mountain of material goes completely under the radar, completely unreported. And when we're dealing with nanoparticles, so to put this in perspective as to how small they are, which makes them much more harmful, you can put 100,000 nanoparticles across the width of a single human hair. They are inconceivably small. Thus, they can infiltrate every biosystem on the planet, everything. Root systems, they enter through our nasal passages into our olfactory nerve, cross the blood-brain barrier. I don't think too many people don't know how harmful aluminum is to our systems. It's in all of us now. Every person we test, hair, blood, urine, is packed full of aluminum. Now let's add barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene. It's quite a plethora of toxic elements. And when you combine these elements, Jimmy, you have synergistic toxicity. So the overall toxicity goes up exponentially. So again, this is in every precipitation test we take, and we now have peer-reviewed study, published peer-reviewed study to prove there's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth anywhere, period. North Pole, South Pole, top of Mount Everest, everything's contaminated.
Does that include you? And I'm not saying that in a cavalier way. That includes you. And well, you said yes, but you have to say yes.
Been tested.
But
yes,
what about yeah. And what about the bad guys? Are they inoculated? You know what I mean? Aren't they doing it to themselves too? That's the crazier part. And before that sounds like a dumb question, we're talking about people that also have control of weapon systems that could annihilate the earth, which is their own families too as well. So there's not much consideration for other life out there. But if these particulates are out there, they've got them too, right? I mean, nobody is immune.
You're right on track, as always, Jimmy. I so appreciate that about you. And that is a fundamentally important question. Why would they do this to themselves? And as you already started to allude to, the factors and parts of this equation they've already done to themselves. Let's be back up to the whole nuclear bomb scenario. They've detonated over 2,400 nuclear bombs on planet Earth. That has contaminated everything, including them. We have Fukushima. That's a triple nuclear meltdown. No technology to fix it. No end in sight. That's an extinction level event by itself if other factors don't do the job first, which I would argue will be the case on the current course. And not only we're not stopping building nuclear plants, we're actually accelerating our construction of them. We have 60 in construction right now. We have 442 online. It takes to cold shut down those plants takes decades. When society collapses, we'll have Fukushima times several hundred. With climate engineering destroying the atmosphere, and it's the single greatest ozone destroying factor is climate engineering. We can get to that in a minute because that's a near-term existential threat. The ozone layer is at dangerously low levels right now. So now if we have a CME, coronal mass ejection, solar flare, and we have grids shut down around the globe, we have nuclear plants that can't cool themselves. Again, Fukushima times 1, 2, 300, game over. So what people need to realize is that we're dealing with a cancer, a criminally insane cancer. Does a cancer intend to kill itself? No, it intends to proliferate unchecked until the host eventually dies. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. Power addicts. Addicts don't care if the next fix might kill them. They're not going to let go of their power. They're going to do whatever they feel they need to do to hang on to it. And if the host dies in the process, which is the course we're on, they die with it. But people need to realize we're not dealing with sanity. And how many examples of what they've already done to themselves do we need before people get past that question? But it's very appropriate you ask it because many people don't get past it.
Now, and we also have the opposite. We have strange precipitation, but we also have a lack of it too as well. Right now, Texas is on fire, and the amount of fires over the last couple of years, where it has typically, I will say this, typically been a California thing, right? A West Coast thing. I was up with you in Oregon a few years ago when everything went crazy. I was up there, and that was pretty nuts. But now Greece, right? Pick a country, Australia, Canada, up in flames, where the opposite is taking effect too. Is that intentional climate change?
Yes. In the case of the wildfires as well. So we have the engineering winter aspect, chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. I encourage your listeners to search the engineering winter section on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch. They'll be shocked about the fires, the wildfires. Single greatest causal factor behind the wildfires is climate engineering. The source of ignition is a completely separate subject. We can debate that in many different sources of ignition, totally separate subject. The foundational factor, Jimmy, is what is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity, and that is absolutely climate engineering. If we look at Lahaina being a most extreme example. So what happens in Lahaina? Because climate engineering can actually control atmospheric pressure zones, and this is not speculation. We know with ionosphere heaters like HAARP, and for your listeners who don't know what that is, it's a ground-based frequency transmitter that blasts 3.5 million watts of power into the electrically charged ionosphere, causes an electrical chain reaction, causes a bulge in the atmosphere up and down. That creates a lower level pressure zone. In creating these atmospheric pressure zones, they can manipulate upper level wind currents. So Lahaina, we had a very anomalous high pressure zone to the north, which spins clockwise in the northern hemisphere. To the south, we had a very anomalous low pressure. That spins counterclockwise. Between the two, they basically are able to create a wind tunnel, which they did over Lahaina. Climate engineering is far more effective at cutting off precipitation even than augmenting it. When you put too many particles into a storm system, too many condensation nuclei, the droplets don't combine and fall as rain. So, Jimmy, have you seen the skies that we have now so often where it's just featureless skies, no rain falling out? It's just this featureless uniform canopy. And that is indicative of climate engineering and solar radiation management, where they've scattered the moisture, nothing's falling, but they've created this huge solar radiation management canopy so they can cut the precipitation off. And they're very effective at that. I'll give an example in a moment. On Lahaina, it was officially designated a flash drought zone the week before the incineration. So we had, regardless of the source of ignition, again, separate subject, once ignited, we had basically a blowtorch bellows effect, horizontal 80-mile-an-hour winds. And when you feed a fire with that kind of flame, you create extraordinarily high temperatures. That's how blacksmiths have been forging steel for thousands of years with the bellows effect. And when you have a wooden town, 80-mile-an-hour horizontal wind, nothing can make it. And these particles, Jimmy, are incendiaries. This is an incendiary dust. Aluminum nanoparticles are such an effective incendiary that they are literally a core element in demolitions of thermite. That's how effective they are. So when you have flash drought, you coat the foliage and structures with this incendiary dust, you get a source of ignition, and you get Lahaina. That's one example. So again, and we see, I'll leave it with this. That's only one aspect of agendas being carried out. We can speculate on all those agendas, but the fact that climate engineering is core is not speculation. And I'll leave with this. Canada last year, Jimmy, lost almost 72,000 acres. Square miles, 72,000 square miles. Okay. That's bigger than the state of Florida or Georgia. And those forests are being used as a form of climate engineering, as a form of artificial volcano to put so much particulate matter into the air, it causes temporary cooling. That's how desperate they are. And we have peer-reviewed study to back that up. So if you remember that New York, that was very warm before the Canadian fire started, the smoke drifted down over New York, cooled temperatures by 30 degrees. That's how desperate they are. And we have an engineering wildfire section as well. So sorry to rant and ramble, but you're correct. The wildfires are most directly linked to climate engineering.
Now, and I understand, I shouldn't say I understand. I have read different studies that have proposed some type of, and there's different ways that this has been discussed, but something to reflect the radiation and heat from coming through the atmosphere. And there's different, ideas that have been put out there. But then the opposite effect will result from that, which is you're also sealing everything in, and we become a thermos. And that isn't good either. And is this part of that attempt, this strange thinking of building up some kind of new unnatural layer in the atmosphere?
Well, that's a great question, framed in that way, that is this part of their objective? It's certainly a result. You're completely correct. Yes, these particles can deflect some of the daytime thermal energy. They also trap it at night. And in addition to trapping it, again, these elements are highly toxic. Bioavailable aluminum, which does not exist in nature naturally. No free-form aluminum exists. It's always bonded to other elements unless it's been mined, refined, and dispersed. Bioavailable aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period. So the fact that this is coming down in our precipitation is killing root systems. It's killing the flora. The trees stop nutrient uptake when they sense this toxin, so they're not absorbing carbon. They're not releasing oxygen. So it's not just the trapping of the heat is what I'm getting at. You're causing this cascading downstream effect of catastrophic consequences. And that's exactly what we have happening. So destroying the ozone layer, Jimmy, is allowing extremely intense UV radiation to reach the Earth's surface now, including UVC. That's killing plankton. No people. Plankton is the largest single source of oxygen on the planet. We just got peer-reviewed study from the Atlantic. 90% decline in plankton there. Crash, 90%. Why isn't that headlines on every single newspaper instead of the political stupidity that we see? I don't care what side of the fence people are on. It's all theater, all of it, to distract them from the fact that the oncoming train is about to take us all out. So again, is the heating of the planet part of their objective? I would argue we don't see anything that would indicate that. Is it an absolute consequence of what they're doing? Yeah, right. Absolutely. And again, I want to stress the weather warfare part. There's no question this is weather warfare. One example, and with you, after 9/11, when General Wesley Clark was given the list of Middle Eastern countries that were to be targeted, a list that clearly existed before 9/11 even happened, every single one of those Middle Eastern countries subsequently underwent a once in 1,000-year drought. That's mathematically, statistically impossible to have that kind of coincidence unless there's a climate intervention operation involved. Certainly there was. And we have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, I wonder why they hate us so much, on the floor of the UN stating NATO is cutting off our precipitation. We can't water our crops. Back to the weather warfare.
Now, I've read two strange things over the last couple of years, and they're becoming more and more frequent. It's part of the drip by the media. Is this that the global currents are changing in the air and in the water? They are altering the very two fundamental systems that draw everything out of Africa, across North America, and then into Asia, right? Pollination, air, all of this is involved, right? And then the circulation and the normal currents of the oceans are changing. Now, they're changing at the same time, Dane. And it seems like nobody wants to pay attention to this, but I think there's a cause for concern here.
You couldn't be more correct. You're completely on track with this, and the gravity of these unfolding scenarios cannot be overstated. You're talking about the AMOC current, and it's on the verge of collapsing. In fact, is beginning to collapse right now. That's the Earth's circulatory system. That's how it cools itself, taking warmer water from the equatorial regions and pulling it north, cooler water to the south. When you shut off that circulatory system, we don't live on the same planet anymore. And we already don't. I mean, we've already damaged the planet to such a degree that we will never again know the thriving Earth we have known. But back to what I described earlier with climate engineering and atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, that changes upper level wind currents. And I think this is where you're going. You're completely correct. That changes upper level wind currents. That in turn affects ocean currents. So all of these systems are so complex and so intertwined. When you engineer the entire planet, and that's exactly what we have. We have countries all over the globe, either actively or passively cooperating, all covertly. And this is a trajectory for near-term planetary omnicide. So these currents that people might have heard might shut down at the end of this century, they're shutting down now. These long-term warnings from the so-called science community are meant to pacify populations, to keep them completely asleep at the wheel until the moment of impact. This is happening right now. So I would argue that the nonlinear nature of what's unfolding, including what you just brought up, the upper level wind currents changing, the La Nina, El Nino pattern, which they can manipulate. The La Nina is, now they've used the word crashing. We've never seen that word used with the Enso cycle before, because they can crash it. They can alter those currents and they can shut it down. They allowed some heat to escape from the oceans. That's the El Nino, but it's warming way too rapidly. Now they're shutting it down. And to give an example of that, Jimmy, you mentioned the Texas fires. Thank you for that. They flashed dried out that area. Some of the areas that are burning had snow on them 3 weeks ago. So while Texas was over 100 degrees this last week, I'll leave it with this. Parts of China were 62 degrees below zero, killed about 2 million animals so far and counting.
Yeah, I read that today in Mongolia. 2.9 million head of cattle. Yeah, that's crazy. Here's the other question. They blamed it on the weather. Well, it was accurate, but it's right there. 2.9 million head of cattle died in Mongolia. Wow.
I want to make clear for your followers, Jimmy, that I am in no way denying the damage we've done to the planet. We go through 100 million barrels of carbon fuel a day. We're going through 23,000 tons of coal a day. We're cutting down the forests. We're poisoning the oceans. We're paving the planet. I acknowledge all that. But when you have an element like this in the equation that prevents the planet from responding to the damage done in the equation like Mongolia or the Canadian wildfires, that is almost completely a result of climate engineering in both cases. Those surface temperatures could not drop that precipitously without chemical ice nucleation, weather modification, period. And we're testing that material, so I'm not guessing. Same with over the fires. Again, source of ignition, separate subject. But when we can see on satellite imagery, they are cutting off the precipitation to huge swaths of Canada, on some years, California, and other years. There's no guesswork in this equation. We can see what they're doing. And we can speculate about the agendas and objectives again, but the fact that climate engineering is core to the equation can't be argued.
The other part of this, which I find so strange, is that there's a circle, and the circle is simple. We have people; they need to be fed. We need water to drink. We have the oceans that we are overfishing. We have the ground where beef and vegetables and things are, and all of this is a cycle. That cycle is the same cycle that nature created for this planet billions of years ago, right? One thing eats the other. There's a balance, carbon monoxide out, oxygen in. Water cleanses itself, and the planet can typically just right itself. It's nature, and we're messing with that now. With the overfishing and what we're doing with the if that goes away, and then everything else, it's a domino effect, isn't it, Dane? This perfect machine, which is hard to mess up, once you take that step too far, You can't stop it.
Yeah, you're right again. You're right again, Jimmy. And this is what people don't understand. Yes, the planet was unimaginably resilient, but as we know, human nature always to push that past that point, and we absolutely have. I mean, we've treated the planet with such contempt. It's a wonder that any of us are still around. And when you add this on top of everything else we've done, then that's simply a statistical trajectory for near-term omnicide. And when I say near-term, again, to make this clear to people, on the current trajectory, near-term doesn't mean centuries out or decades out. Here's a few not so fun facts as to what near-term means. We've already lost 80 to 90% of the terrestrial and aquatic insect life. 80 to 90% today, now. No insects, no people. Plankton down 90% in the Atlantic, other oceans not far behind. The global food fish, pelagic fish populations are crashing right now. Wildlife populations, we've lost 70% plus in the last 40 years alone. On the current rate of wildlife die-off, if it doesn't accelerate, and it is accelerating, we face 0 hour for no functional wildlife populations on this planet in 2026. I try to imagine that. That doesn't mean nothing's left. It means there's no functional populations, which means that at the current statistical loss and loss of habitat, that it is a statistical speed that they will die off and they cannot recover. And that's where we're at now. And people are going about their lives, watching football games, taking cruises as if there's nothing wrong. And that is absolutely astounding to me, how they can't see the flashing lights and the blaring horn of the oncoming train, Jimmy. It's truly shocking to me.
Well, I'll help everybody. Okay, Dane, you and I are the same age. Now, I'm not fishing for your age, but maybe you'll tell us in just a second. I graduated high school in 1981. All right? So 42 years ago. I'm 60. All right? You're 51, 52, I'm guessing.
61.
Okay. 61. Like I said, we're the same age. You were muted there for a second. Okay, so we're the same age. 1981, population of planet Earth with Homo sapiens sapien, 4 billion people. Here we are in 2024, and we have doubled since I graduated high school. And do you know, it took 3 billion years. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Okay, so it took 3 billion years to get to 4 billion people. It took 40 years to get to 8. And if that isn't right there, if that doesn't cause you to just stop and go, hold on a minute, how long can we sustain this? And why is it that it is in our human nature to just take over everything and not consider what's going on around us? Why? I know you've put some thought to this. Why are we so self-destructive?
That is truly a profound question. And I just want to say that I really was looking forward to this exchange with you tonight, as I have greatly enjoyed our previous exchanges, because your feet are so firmly on the ground and you will talk about what few people are willing to talk about. And thank you so much for that. You're again completely correct. This overshoot, and it is inconceivable overshoot with the expansion of our species and the destruction of our habitat, without which we die. And for those who say, and we get messages like this at Geoengineering Watch, Jimmy, that, well, there's no population problem because we could all fit in the state of Texas and still have some elbow room left. It's not about elbow room. It's about functional habitat. And it takes a lot of land, depending on the type of land, to support a single individual. People don't realize this. Again, we're going through 100 million barrels of carbon fuel a day to industrial farm what's left of Earth's fertile soils, which is not much. The Amazon is crashing, by the way, for your people. If your listeners are not aware of that, the Amazon past the tipping point, it's done. It's a matter of time now. And again, these are one of the secondary lungs of the planet, along with the boreal forests, both of which are now carbon sources, not carbon sinks, they don't absorb more carbon than they emit. They're emitting more than they absorb right now. Think about that. And people, again, because they hear some radio talking head say it's all just alarmism, when you're facing imminent near-term extinction and the statistics back that up, that's not alarmism. That's simply reality. And that reality is something that most don't want to face. So anyway, back to your original statement, Jimmy, you're completely correct. The overshoot is mind-numbing here. And we're about to find out the hard way how much we've overshot the planet's life support system. So let me back that into climate engineering now and other factors that we faced in the last few years. The power structure, those at the top, those that print the money who are ultimately responsible for all of it. That's where the top of the pyramid is, those who control the flow of money. But they know the planet can't support this population. It's losing its ability to support even what's here by the day. And thus they are in many ways thinning the herd right now.
I'm sure you saw this, and I'll just mention this really quick. And everybody, when we come back after the break, we'll discuss some of the fixes. Okay, it's not all. I mean, we have to. It's so strange, Jane. We have to go to the edge of the cliff in the dark and put our foot out in the dark to feel the edge of the cliff before we always do that, right? We go right to the edge and take a peek, and we have an opportunity here to not do that this time around if we just take care of business. And we'll talk about that after the break. But one of the craziest headlines of the year, and it's only February, was yesterday and today. The headline was Mexico City to run out of water in the next couple of months. It's like, what? Mexico City? Now, I was just there, right? And it's a big city. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Well, they're sinking too. You know that.
Yeah, and sinking 20 inches per year.
Yes.
Per year. 20 inches per year.
You know your facts. You're on your game, Jimmy.
I do what I can. When Dane's on the show, I'm ready. But yeah, I mean, that is, if that isn't enough, we're talking about a city of 25 million people. It's actually bigger than that, but that's the stated number because of artificial lines. But okay, so 25 million people without water, like in 2 months.
Yep. And the climate engineers control the spigot. Keep that in mind. They can keep that spigot shut off as long as they want. And you have to have more rain on a warming planet. Laws of physics make that clear. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. And we are likely, based on unfiltered data, past 3.5 C right now. Not 1.5, 3.5. There should be much more overall rain, but there isn't. Why not? And yes, I realize we have deluge and catastrophic flooding in places, but overall, the only way there can be less overall rainfall on a rapidly warming planet, if there's a factor we're not being told about, that factor is climate engineering.
Now, I live in the Mojave Desert, right? I live right here in the Mojave Desert, just north of Los Angeles. I live in Palmdale. It's the desert. Okay, so it's desert climate. I get that. It's where I live. But California in general, we all know the headlines over the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and that is the drought. The river's dried up. I've got a reservoir right up the street that emptied, and it's like got boats that were sitting on dirt. The piers you could see, the houses that were around it, these very nice resort-style homes have a dried up lake in front of them. And then, like magic, the last 2 years, what did we have? Last year, we had record snowfall, record rainfall. I live in the desert. I had snow in my backyard, Dane, for 2 weeks. In the Mojave Desert, 2 weeks. 2 weeks of snow in my backyard. This year, what's that?
I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, did that snow seem natural to you? Did you see anything peculiar about that snow?
Okay. You want me to tell you something very peculiar? And I've got the videotape. I'll send it to you. The snowflakes were that big. I've never seen anything like it. I'm 60 years old. I've been through my share of Christmases. I was born in Chicago. This big. They were like the most ginormous snowflakes I have ever seen in the Mojave Desert.
Welcome to chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. That's why we have 2.5 and 3 inch hail now all the time. It's now the norm. Massive hailstorms, chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. And don't eat that snow. And I don't say that lightly. It is highly contaminated. So is the runoff. And here's one more factor. Chemically nucleated material tends to sublimate. So even when we have all this, quote, snow, there's not as much runoff, not nearly as much as there should be, because it's a chemically nucleated element. So dry ice is a chemically nucleated element. No runoff off dry ice, you know that, zero, no water. So the runoff off this chemically nucleated snow is not nearly what it should be, Jimmy.
And they're talking about that same situation in Mexico right now. Mexico City sits on a natural aquifer. It's not, the water is not draining into the aquifer. Hence, the city sinking 20 inches per year. The aquifer is not replenishing itself. There's mountains. They have all the ingredients you would think to replenish the aquifer and keep the city up. And none of this is happening naturally when the opposite should be occurring, right? I'm not crazy here.
No, you're not. And again, the train is so far off the rails right now. There's nothing, quote, historically normal or natural in this equation. And again, even the forest where I live, the western U.S., the predominant tree is the fir tree, Douglas fir tree. Every fir tree in western North American forests is in some stage of dying or death right now. The most recent science study on the fir trees was titled Firmageddon. So we know what that implies. They're all dying. And so even though you get this precipitation, it's toxic. So it doesn't revive the forest. It simply finishes it off even faster. We're getting more flash outs right now in the middle of winter than we do even in summer because the precipitation is toxic. So again, they are pounding the nails into our collective coffin, Jimmy, and it's coming from the sky. No place to hide it. We don't deal with it. We're done. It's that simple.
Yeah. Can I ask you, it's emotional to me, but before we take the break, when I was a kid, and I hate to sound like my parents, but I'm going to say, when I was a kid, when we were kids, the clouds of monarch butterflies, yes, it was the coolest thing to see. Going out during the summer and seeing all of the bees just jumping around flowers to fly, across, going out. You remember when we catch bees in jars? Remember how fun that was?
Absolutely.
You can't find a monarch butterfly today. I haven't seen a bee. And I don't know how long. Now, either I've got the Mandela effect and I'm remembering my childhood differently, or there's something fundamentally going on here that's wrong.
It's not your imagination. Monarch butterflies are down to 1% of their original populations. 1%. And on the bees, I encourage your listeners to search this. Search bees aluminum, and they will find peer-reviewed science study to prove that bees are dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia in a human being. Why? Because they're packed full of bioavailable aluminum. Where did that come from? I wonder. Climate engineering, again, primary element, aluminum nanoparticles, and based on precipitation tests, we've taken over a single U.S. state done with an internationally recognized institution and extrapolated the amount of metal in our precipitation over the entire planet. It appears that they're spraying somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons, 40 to 60 million tons of these nanoparticles annually. That's inconceivable. It's on everything. It's in everything. And when we have peer-reviewed study to prove bees are dying of symptoms that resemble Alzheimer's and dementia because they're packed full of aluminum, why isn't that headlines everywhere? I'm not denying other causes. I'm not denying chemicals. I'm not denying radio frequency transmissions. But why is this part of the equation being ignored?
Yeah. And of course, the other headline this week is the glaciers that are getting ready to break off. And And the word I don't want to be too much of an alarmist here, but the words they use, the nouns and adjectives they use to describe the glacier in the situation that we're in is DEFCON 1. Like the Doomsday Glacier. And I didn't want to say the word. Thanks, Dane. I didn't want to say it. but that's when you see this in the headlines, and it is actually happening, and it's not just in Antarctica, it's in Greenland, it's in Switzerland, it's in the Italian Alps, it's in the Andes Mountains, it's here in California. The glaciers that are typically all over Mount Adams and Shasta are disappearing. How different is it for you? You can see Shasta from your house, right?
I can, and I
summited
Mount Shasta a few years ago on my own. I went solo, looked at what was left of the ice there. You know your data so well, Jimmy. Thank you so much. That makes it so productive to do this. The Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica, that's the Doomsday Glacier. That is the buttress that holds the land-based ice from sliding into the ocean. So once you lose that cleat, the land-based ice slides much faster, and you have what's called a moulin, holes in the ice on the land-based ice where the meltwater on the surface is draining into this hole, these shafts that go, in some cases, a mile or two into the ice, lubricating it against the bedrock, causing it to slide even faster. And what happens when you lose the weight of the land-based ice from land masses like Antarctica or Greenland? You get what's called glacial rebound. When the weight of the ice is lost, the landmass begins to actually rise out of the ocean, and that displaces even more seawater. So I don't think you're not being an alarmist. That term has been simply used to try to discourage anyone from telling the truth. It's called being a realist. And the bottom line is, I'll make another comparison here. The human race, occupants of a car going 100 miles an hour, 10 feet from impact into a concrete wall, we can hit the brakes all we want. We are going to hit that wall. Can we still salvage something at this late hour? I would argue yes, but only if we all focus our efforts and energy on that all-important task. And again, it's worth fighting for, or I wouldn't be in this battle. But what we face is very grave and very immediate.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we come back. I mean, I like to say that I walk around with flowers hanging out of my pocket, which is fine. It's good to have a positive attitude, but you can't be dumb about it, and you can't ignore it. I want to go back to the point that you made about displacement. And if you go back, the best way to describe it, if you have a balloon in your hand, I'm talking to the audience, not to you, Dane. If you have a balloon in your hand and you squeeze it, well, then you know what happens. Another part of the balloon expands, right? So during the last ice age, here in North America, for example, where we had 2 feet of ice over Canada and North America, when that melted, that weight was relieved. Well, something else had to give somewhere else, not only here in the United States, but somewhere else in the world also changed. And that's what's happening right now in Antarctica. So that pressure, if it gets relieved here, it's got to go somewhere else. And trust me, we are very pliable. We are malleable. And that will change. It's the same thing as squeezing a balloon, and that is what glacier displacement is. And if it happens, and it's happening, we will see the effects of that rapidly somewhere around the world nearly at the same time.
We are. And again, the accelerating melt-off, if you take an ice chest that still has any ice in it at all, which is a heat-absorbing cushion, the moment that ice is gone, whatever's in that ice chest heats up very quickly. And that when you don't have that heat sink, and that's the position we're hurtling toward. It's called a BOE, a blue ocean event. And some of the frontline polar scientists think we may be headed for a double BOE, which means the end of the world as we know it. But when we lose the ice off the polar regions, we lose that part of the Earth's air conditioning system, and that reflective ice that sends 90% of the sun's thermal energy back out into space. Now we have dark ocean absorbing 90%. You tilt the whole scale radically, rapidly in the wrong direction. And we are hurtling toward that. And climate engineering, in the attempt to mask that, hide it from populations, making it worse, not better.
You know what the positive is? I'm going to try to make Dane laugh. Maybe, maybe we'll have a 1,000,000-year-old the city of Atlantis underneath the ice get exposed. The other secret that they're keeping from us, right? I don't know. I have often thought that they have kept Antarctica from us for a lot of reasons. It's very, very difficult to travel down there. And I always thought, what is it that they're hiding? Is it something underneath the ice? Well, how about just the ice disappearing is a big deal? You know, I just, here's another thought, and then we've got to take a break. I just went to Peru, as I had mentioned. You know what I saw in Peru? We went in Paracas. We took a tour boat out to these protected islands and World Heritage Site. Incredible, incredible. I saw penguins. Yeah, on this island. And I don't know what you call a group of penguins. I don't know what's a group of penguins called. Everybody, somebody post that. I think they waved. And last night I had Dolan on the show. Have you ever seen a penguin in the wild? No.
Yes.
You have. Oh, you have? You have?
Yeah.
You have? Is
Yes,
that like the
in New
coolest
Zealand,
thing
New
ever?
Zealand.
Is that the coolest thing ever?
Yes.
I don't want that to go away, man.
I don't
just
either.
don't.
Doesn't it break your heart that they're dying in mass in Antarctica right now? Emperor penguins and we're losing these miraculous creatures, and it absolutely breaks my heart, from the monarchs to the penguins to the whales, and people going about their life as if nothing's wrong. And then there's, of course, the carnage with the human race and the conflict zones around the world that are orchestrated by the same sources, the same criminal cancerous cabal that's spraying our skies are the same ones orchestrating conflict zones. It's all the same. And if we don't deal with it, we're done.
Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Dane Wigington. Stay right there. We are talking about global climate change and intervention. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now.
My job is not to preach. My job is to take you on this journey.
In a state of passion, nothing negative can happen.
That it's the moons of those planets that would have life.
Sometimes I see, these energies also in your field.
It is our passion and our pleasure.
Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black T-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 T-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 T-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black T-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture. Send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black T-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 T-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping. And you're going to get a tracking number. And with a Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black T-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Dane Wigington is with us. His website, and I say this every time Dane and I are together, geoengineeringwatch.org is the reason to have the internet. I don't say that lightly. Dane, okay, but what do we do? Right, I was checking out the comments in the chat for a minute, and it's one thing to talk and to have positive vibes. Yeah, okay, I do that. I do that because of the micro that spreads out to the macro, but it's another thing to do something about it. So let's get a to-do list together. What can we do to start to affect change?
The only way forward in this fight is to reach a critical mass of awareness on this issue, to fully expose it to the world. Only then do we have any chance of stopping it. So even now, while there's legislation being proposed in several U.S. states to stop climate engineering over those states, that will never actually stop it, no matter what legislation they pass. These are DoD operations. They consider it national security. But what those efforts will do is to gain needed awareness. I have some state representatives, they call me at home now to get information on this issue. We're mailing them supplies that we printed materials at Geoengineering Watch that we have that make it exponentially easier to introduce this issue to others. When you have a printed color material with satellite images, copies of for example, the illegal gag order. There's an illegal gag order, Jimmy, on all National Weather Service and NOAA employees, the nation's weathermen. Why would you gag the weathermen if you didn't have something incredibly huge to hide? Printed materials that have all that make it much easier to awaken somebody to this issue, as opposed to running out in the street, pointing at the sky and ranting. So we offer those materials, and we have Geoengineering Watch shirts as well, to hopefully people start the conversation with things like that. It's all on our homepage. Our printed materials we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We're taking a loss on that. We simply want to get into the circulation. But as you start these spot fires of awareness, because this issue is so huge, Jimmy, it's not like any other issue. You can put other issues in your rearview mirror and pretend it didn't happen. You can't do that with climate engineering, because it's getting bigger and badder in front of the windshield every single day. No hiding this for much longer. So if people sow these seeds of awareness, if they stoke those fires, and we build a blaze that can't be extinguished, and we expose this issue, and all our military brothers and sisters that are participating and being told that they're doing something benevolent, which couldn't be further from the truth. If we can wake them up, if we can bring this issue to light, we have a chance of stopping it from the inside out. If we can do that and allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done, we would at least buy time, and that's worth fighting for.
Years ago, I remember you and I talking about this, but this was my own personal experience with something crazy when it comes to weather engineering. There was, in the local news down here, a story about cloud seeding. I think it was 5, might have been 7 cloud seeding stations that were going to be put in the foothills around Burbank, right, for rainfall. Okay, so I read the article and I save it, and then I put it in the news on the show. And then somebody asked me the next day for the link, and I went, "Oh yeah, not a problem." It was gone. And I went, "What?" So then I do a search on Google for the story. It's not there. And in the story, I had everything. It was $700,000 was going to be spent on these 5 or 7 seeding stations that were going to feed and seed the clouds around Burbank. Everything was there. The land and the appropriation and everything was all in the article. I didn't imagine it. And then it just disappeared. It was like crazy. And I remember you and I talking about this. And so many people reached out to me and said the same thing. Dude, there's no news about this anywhere. It's really, really funny how it can be controlled and removed if we're trying to get the awareness out, and something like there is there as a tool for us to use, at least to ask questions, as citizens, to ask about this, and it just vaporized, Dane. It was gone.
You bring up an important point, which is why when we find extraordinary images on the NASA satellite archives, we capture them immediately because they scrub them as soon as they find them. We just put out a video, Square Clouds. It's on our homepage now.
Can we talk about that? Can we talk about that? I got like 5 emails today about, don't forget to ask Dane about square clouds. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Let's stay right there. What is what is a square cloud?
Frequency transmission. When they have an air mass saturated with electrically conductive particulates, and they expose that to frequency transmissions, which they have land and sea-based. Have you ever seen what looks like a giant oil drilling platform with a huge golf ball on top of it, Jimmy? It's called SBX radar, sea-based X-band radar. That's simply for climate modification. They can float that anywhere they want, and they can literally draw a line in the sky. They can repel particles on a specific side of a frequency transmission. So you end up with clouds, and again, our video shows this extraordinarily. And try to find that on the NASA archives now. You can't, because they scrub it, exactly like you stated. And all their climate modeling is designed not to show the crisscrossing trails everywhere. They're all washed out of the modeling. Once in a while, you can find one that's not gone through that process, and you can see how patchwork the sky is with their aerosol operations. But this is business as usual. And to separate and delineate also, for those that don't know the difference between, quote, weather modification, which are those ground-based propane burners, the single propeller airplane with some flares on the wings, all those programs are designed as smoke and mirrors. And that doesn't mean I'm sure they deleted what you stated because they don't want people to know about any of this, but that's still designed to distract people from the climate engineering operations. So to compare the two, if you have a weather modification plane, single propeller engine airplane, some flares in the wings, it might release 10 kilos of materials. A KC-135, a U.S. military KC-135 can carry 100 tons of toxic material in a single payload. And they've dumped so much on us in Northern California that they have changed forest floor pH values here. We have normally acidic soils here, 5.4, 5.5. So much material has fallen in our rain. Now we're 6.6, 6.8. That's 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. 1 point on that scale is a magnitude of 10. That's an inconceivable amount of toxic elements saturating our soils, our waters. I mean, this is an absolute all-out assault on the entire web of life, Jimmy, nothing less.
Yeah, I'm looking at square clouds here on the internet, and that's pretty nuts. Okay. That's not nature. No, that's not nature. I have yet to see one of these in person, but you bring up another really good point, and I want to go back and address this. It seems like there are no clouds anymore. It's kind of weird. I don't. Two things. One, the sky, maybe it's just my eyes. The sky doesn't seem as blue, and the clouds aren't as frequent, and the sun feels like it's a different color. Now, that's just me, but is it my memory going bad, or is there something else at play here?
Well, first, you're completely correct on all fronts. And I'll get to the rest of that question in a moment. In regards to all of our cognitive function, how would we know if we're getting dumber by the day? Perhaps we'd be less capable of telling that. Here's the bottom line is we are all sucking up these metals. All of us, no exceptions. There are very real and documented cognitive decline impacts from this exposure, period. So some of us will likely fight this off more than others, depending on our diet, our habits, our makeup, our DNA. But it's happening to all of us. So back to the clouds, you're completely correct. Back to the appearance of the sun, because it's now the light is being refracted to these light scattering particles. So nothing has changed with the sun. It's what we're looking at the sun through. Does that make sense? That's what is causing this white appearance. And even on a, quote, clear day, if you put something up to block the sun, you'll still see this silvery white hue around it from the particles that are saturating our air masses. And on the clouds, when you expose clouds to these condensation nuclei, it tends to blow them apart. That's why we have moisture being pumped into the western U.S. right now. They're really playing this up. We'll see if it reaches fruition based on their agenda. They're chemically nucleating that and scattering it. So when you saturate the air mass with these particles, the transmissions from ground-based networks, the NexRad network, and we have all this recorded. We're monitoring these signals. We're not guessing. it scatters this moisture over the widest possible area. That's solar radiation management. So we have the western half of the U.S. now largely blanketed in featureless skies, and they're not, quote, clouds as we remember, Jimmy. You're completely correct, but it is a canopy of toxic elements, but it completely disrupts the hydrological cycle. They can augment the precipitation. They can cool it chemically. Nothing is natural at this point. And let me leave with this. This is where we're headed. You hear the statement always, Jimmy, with the atmospheric saturation of CO2, right? That we're like 420 ppm on that right now, 420 parts per million and of CO2. You've heard that probably. What don't they tell us? What's the CO2 equivalent right now, which includes methane, nitrous oxide? And methane, I'm not talking about cow flatulence. I'm talking about methane blowouts. This is what the Bermuda Triangle has been for decades. It's methane deposits on the sea floor. As the ocean warms, those methane fields tend to release in entirety. You have an aeration of the water column. If there's a surface vessel that has no buoyancy, it goes to the bottom intact. That methane then migrates into the atmosphere and starts to cover it like a layer of glass. And we have, if you want to search online, Jimmy, Siberian methane craters and look at those images, it would shock you to the marrow. Looks like nuclear bombs going off in the tundra. It's happening on the seafloor. So when we get to the CO2 equivalent, I'm leading back to the clouds, so bear with me. The CO2 equivalent now is likely in the 800 to 900 ppm range. So if we, based on current science, and we can't know if this is correct, but it's the consensus is that if we reach 1200, level of 1200 CO2 equivalent, which we're perilously close to when we look at all the other gases combined, the planet may lose its ability to make clouds. You can't just alter atmospheric chemistry this radically and have the planet function. And what happens then if we reach that threshold, and in fact that happens? Game over. It's called Venus syndrome. We're done. So people think that, and that's not a metaphor. Venus syndrome is not a metaphor. It's when you trigger enough feedback loops, and we've likely triggered about 50 right now, and the methane is one of those. As the methane heats, releases into the atmosphere, covers the planet like a layer of glass. Now you have more heating, more methane release. It feeds on itself. We have about 50 of those loops in play. Venus syndrome. Again, we reach that point, we're done. And too many people, Jimmy, have convinced themselves there's some magic thermostat on the planet. You can do whatever you want to it, and it will always support life. That notion couldn't be further from the truth.
Okay, so if you had the power and you had a magic wand, what would you do first? What would be your first order of action?
The single greatest leap we can take in the right direction right now, and it doesn't mean the only leap. I want to make that clear. A lot of things need to stop if we're to have any chance of anybody surviving what's coming. First thing I would do, halt atmospheric interference on every level. Frequency transmissions, aerosol dispersions. The flights in general need to be stopped or curtailed as much as possible. And this includes the passenger flights as well. All of them are doing damage to the atmosphere. We cannot live this way and expect to survive long. But stopping the intentional intervention with the climate would be the absolute first order of business. And again, there's so many layers, not just the aerosol dispersions, but the frequency transmission manipulations of those. And I'll leave with this. As the methane builds up, I want to stitch all this together. As the methane is building up in the atmosphere, we have other layers of insanity being heaped into this equation, much like the pharmaceutical industrial approach. Take this pharmaceutical, all the side effects. Here's 10 more pharmaceuticals for those side effects. You see how that equation goes. So now we have, with the methane, Project Lucy and Alamo. Those are acronyms for what appears to be fully operational right now, blasting the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in a desperate, dangerous, and unimaginably destructive.
Oh, you cut off, Dane.
What you see is this cascading effect.
Okay, Dane.
Of insanity from the military-industrial complex. It never ends.
Okay, you actually went blank for about 10 seconds. So let's back up to Lucy, and you have to repeat the whole thing.
Okay, I apologize. So we have acronyms, Project Lucy and Alamo. Those are acronyms for two utterly insane operational programs appear to be fully deployed right now. to microwave the atmosphere with opposing frequencies in a desperate, dangerous, and destructive attempt to molecularly degrade the methane buildup. And that by itself, these frequency transmissions are causing another list of downstream consequences. It just keeps going, just like the pharmaceutical approach for the human body. It's just one layer of insanity on top of another, and they don't know how to stop. They only know how to double down again and again and again. And if this continues, our days are numbered.
Okay, there are so stop with unnatural attempts to control the weather in a general sense. Sounds like a big step in the right direction. Wanted to ask you about this. Yes. Okay. And so now there's another component to this. You mentioned commercial aircraft and transportation around the world. Obviously, that's not going to stop. Can't do it. But the other component to this is what's going on with shipping and ocean traffic. That is a heavy pollutant. I had no idea until I read some of the data on this about how much pollutants are created with our logistics system, and also passenger ships as well, cruise ships around the world. But my question is, yes, I own a Harley, I own a Jeep. I enjoy both, Dane. I don't want to see them go away. But is electric transportation an effective alternative to sea traffic, transportation, trains, and so forth, and maybe even the commercial airline industry going electric? Will that help fix things?
No. That is absolutely, at absolute best, even solar, wind power, those are carbon fuel extenders at best. Takes an unimaginable amount of carbon fuel to build a wind turbine 90 stories high, which is very inefficient. And let's go back to climate engineering and weave it into your question. And again, from the batteries, the mining, the rare earth element mining, we were destroying the planet for a total facade of, quote, renewable energy, which isn't. And that's part of my background, Jimmy. As you know, that's what got me into this fight to begin with. I have a background. I worked in one of the first commercial solar plants in the continental U.S. in the early 80s. That's an empty field of blowing sand now because that plant was inviable. In fact, your listeners can watch Planet of the Humans, very comprehensive documentary on just how non-renewable so-called renewable energy is. In my home, I'm on solar, wind, and hydro. I'm off the grid. Have been for 20-something years. I was the cover article of the world's largest renewable energy magazine, but that doesn't mean this is, quote, renewable energy, because it's not. And it's not going to save us. And back to climate engineering. Let's weave that into your question. Climate engineering is radically curtailing solar power, wind power, and hydropower. How much sense does it make to push these so-called renewable energy forms, which they're not, they're alternative, but not renewable, when you're filling our skies with these particles that are radically reducing the production from all three forms of those energy sources? So when you block direct sunlight, you can block 60, 70, 80% or more of solar power uptake. The commercial solar plants are producing half or less what their rated output is because of solar radiation management. How stupid is that? Wind power. If a wind turbine from its optimal speed, if you double the wind speed, how much power do you make? Nothing, because you have to shut that turbine off to keep it from blowing apart. If you cut that speed in half from optimal, how much power do you make? 1/8 of the rated capacity, 1/8. So we have climate engineering radically affecting winds. It's either all or nothing. We either have huge winds or what's called global stilling. And that is a scientific term because overall wind is down on the planet. Overall direct sunlight down. That's what the global dimming, thus our film, the dimming. And hydropower. We have dams. You know that, Jimmy. You know that the Hoover Dam, the Glen Canyon Dam, I mean, if they get to Deadpool, no hydro. Same with the dams in the Amazon. So from every conceivable direction, we can link the roads to our collective demise back to climate engineering.
You make such a good point. You go and you misdirect the sunlight, and at the same time, you're building solar farms. The solar farms don't get the sunlight because you're blocking. It's madness. It's absolute madness.
It is. And I want to that's direct sunlight. I want to make that clear to your listeners. There's not an 80 to 90% drop in visible light. It's direct sunlight. So they might not, many people might not notice a difference, but if you don't have direct, unobstructed sunlight, solar PV doesn't work, period.
Now, what happens? I'm going to ask you like the simplest question in the world. So let's say I'm Dane. Let's say I'm off grid. I was just at a friend of mine's house, by the way, not too far from here last weekend. He's totally off the grid. He's got his own well water. Nice house, by the way. This is not, up in the mountains, crazy town. This is right here, but completely self-sufficient. Solar, water. He has nothing coming in from the outside. Very, very cool. But in the event of an EMP, what happens to the electrical grid on something that is self-contained? Does the wiring go bad there? Do the solar panels go bad?
Depending on the extent of the EMP, it could very much be yes. Inverters knocked out.
Right.
And the same can happen even with, for example, if you have because I'm on hydro, I have it's about 1 kilometer away from my house. And so a lightning strike that happened here, those currents branch out over the surface, especially when there's rain associated with it, and they get picked up by a conductor anywhere. Same happens with EMP. As that pulse spans out, any conductor picks up some of that current, and that does bad things to inverters, to batteries. I mean, depending on, again, the strength of the EMP, it could take the whole system out. And even a system that's, quote, self-sufficient, as soon as those batteries wear out, it's done. You have to have a big battery bank to live off grid, period. And again, these are toxic batteries that none of this is addressed by the so-called renewable energy people. It's not renewable. And I've seen charging stations, you've probably seen this too, Jimmy, that out behind this charging station, there's a diesel generator to generate the power for the charging station. How much sense does it make? It's so, again, we've painted ourselves into a very dark corner. I know that's hard to face because so many people want the happy ending. They want the, please tell me to do A, B, and C, and we'll live happily ever after. But I would argue that a life well lived is one that focused on what mattered and not what didn't. The time well used, and in fighting for to protect what we've been given. And it is a gift. And we've treated it with unimaginable contempt. And I can find no greater solace than fighting for what's left. And to put this in perspective, I've used this example before, and I'll leave it with this. If your child was in a burning house, you knew you had very little chance of saving that child, would you not try? Of course we would try. All of us would. And that's the fight we face. You don't sit down on the bench because you're not guaranteed a happy ending, but far too many are doing that. And I'm sorry to say it, I don't mean to bring this into the equation, but for example, in the spiritual institutions, and I've been into many, talk to their leaders who all say, well, we don't need to do anything. It's all in big hands. Wait a minute. I know biblical scripture as well. I know what the other traditions teach. They don't teach you to sit on a church pew and do nothing. So we have that kind of mentality permeated into our society. The same with the so-called patriots that think that their only responsibility is to pick a particular. I've been watching too much Porky Pig. I'm sorry, I'm slurring my words together here. To say to pick a particular power structure puppet and elect them as if that's going to fix anything in a system that's completely rigged. I don't care what side of the fence we're talking about. So we have a whole lot of people trying to find excuses to do nothing. And that's a recipe for certain near-term planetary omnicide. That mentality needs to change on all sides of the fence.
I watched the video. It's gone on now for a few years. The global climate change get together that they do with all the countries around the world. They pick another country. The amount of private jets, right, that are flown to these, right? And it's just like a fleet, hundreds and hundreds of private jets and a bunch of people parading on stage about, signing these treaties for climate change. That doesn't mean to say that I'm ignorant. I'm glad that they're having the conversation, certainly. But there is a direct contrast to what is going on if you have 200 Gulf Streams, right, parked on a private. There's something wrong with it, something hypocritical. And with that, I want your comment on that. But then what about these carbon footprint agreements and contracts that people make for the trade-off of their carbon footprint? Is that just hot air?
Yes, yes, and yes. So many good points you bring up. The COP conferences, total smoke and mirrors. Behind closed doors, what are they doing at those conferences? They're forcing nations to either actively or passively participate in climate engineering. They have no intention whatsoever of changing business as usual. That's why they show up in their Gulf Streams, because that's not a part of the plan. They're not about to let go of that. It's the proverbial monkey with their hand in the jar. I used that example before because it simulates humanity. It's the way African hunters catch a monkey. They put a fruit in a jar. Monkey comes up, grabs the fruit, can't get his hand out of the jar, so he ends up on the dinner menu. And that's kind of the human mentality. They're not going to let go of that fruit, even if it kills them. And that's the mentality of the elite, of too much of populations. And so these big conferences are simply designed to make it look like they're going to somehow change business as usual, which they're not. And behind closed doors, this is all about forcing other nations to actively or passively participate in climate engineering, which will lead to our near-term demise, period. And the rest, the carbon credit trading, smoke and mirrors, all of it. Back to what I stated earlier, when you have forests like the Amazon or boreal forests in the northern latitudes, which were a larger carbon sink even than the Amazon, but now are not. They're no longer carbon sinks, they're carbon sources. So so you lock up a section of forest and claim then you can pollute somewhere else. Total hypocrisy. Absolutely total. We're going down from every direction. So again, all of it, everything you mentioned, you're completely correct again, all smoke and mirrors.
What do we do? Now, this is a zone that I don't like going into because it's fact-based, but it's also a crazy Pandora's box to open if you have a fear. But these are the facts. And I know that in some dark boardroom, somewhere right now, there's a conversation with some evil dudes that are just sitting here going, because from top down or from the bottom up, whichever way you want to look at it, they are selling the seeds manufactured to the farmers. They have the banks that are loaning the money to the farmers to buy the seeds. They have the chemical, all owned by the same company. The chemical companies that are manufacturing the chemicals for insecticides and fertilizers at the same time. The farming equipment to farm that food. Again, the same banks are controlling that, and it all the way up through all of that to the control of the weather on the top. Those are the same chemicals that are being manufactured from the same companies at the bottom that are spraying the stuff into the soil. It's every piece from top to bottom or bottom to top, however you want to look at it, is in play. And there are people that need to increase those profits and are talking about how to affect each level in the chain. That is crazy town, and that is reality.
You're, again, completely correct. It's total reality. Disaster capitalism. So we have Monsanto manufacturing aluminum resistant seeds. Also, UV resistant seeds, because they know they're destroying the ozone layer. So let's just manufacture seeds that can tough it out for a while, none of which will matter. None of it will matter. And yes, these disaster capitalists, if I can compare them to the pirates on the deck of a sinking ship, loading their pockets with loot, but it won't matter when the ship goes down. On the current course, no one gets out alive. I don't care how deep their underground bunkers are. They will survive for a while. But if we remain on track for Venus syndrome, this planet will be a lifeless, scorched ball of rock that resembles Venus. And that is not millions and billions of years into the future. The speed at which this can happen, given the damage we have done, is unimaginably fast. And we would be gone long, long before that point. When there's not enough food to go around, game over. And the crops are collapsing around the globe. Fisheries are collapsing around the globe. When we've lost 90% of the global pelagic fish population, by the way, right now, and the rest is dying extraordinarily fast. 98% of bluefin tuna gone, 98%. So, and what's there is poison. It's toxic. Literally, Jimmy, it's toxic. We have peer-reviewed study now from wild-caught fish in the continental U.S., 500 separate locations, all of it toxic, so much so that the study compared eating one wild-caught fish with drinking a month's worth of tainted water. Think about that. How are we to survive if our environment is completely contaminated? And with the plethora of materials that are spraying us, and just so I don't forget to mention this, I have a question for you, Jimmy. Have you noticed any of the deciduous trees that have dead leaves hanging on them all winter long? If they're in a sheltered location, the wind doesn't blow those leaves off. Have you seen that? Have you seen deciduous trees that are fully foliated with stone dead leaves that hang there all winter long?
Yes.
What you're seeing, because that's part of my background. My dad was an arborist, so I love trees. I wanted to plant trees in the forest the rest of my days, but I can't because I have to fight this battle. They are spraying defoliants in the fall, period. We just spent many thousands of dollars to prove this. We'll be publishing something else on this soon. These aren't dioxin defoliants like we had in Vietnam. And people should think about that when they think this is impossible. Hey, we were doing it over 50 years ago in Vietnam. We were defoliating whole jungles. How far have they come with that technology since? What we found is the same type of plant hormone defoliant that farmers are currently using in the Central Valley to force their trees into dormancy, because if those trees don't have enough dormancy time, they will not produce anything. And they've been doing that for many years now. And now we're seeing that even over urban areas, which is where we tested. Why would they do this? Because if those deciduous trees never lose their leaves all winter long, people would start to wonder, wouldn't they? They'd start to connect the dots a bit more. So what we saw was none detectable in September rains, massive spikes in October rain, and back to ND in November. So there was a period in which, and we've noted this on the trees as well, because after specific fall rains, days later, all the leaves on the trees wad up, dead, and hang there on the tree. That's not nature. So what happens? We saw what happened with Agent Orange, right? We saw how long that legacy is still lasting today. What will these defoliants do on top of all the other chemicals that are being spewed into our skies, on top of industrialized pollution? As you said, Jimmy, correctly, nature is resilient. The human body is incredibly resilient. But once the branch breaks, the ground is the next stop.
Yeah. And I wonder, Dane, if it is just the way, I'm going to use the word universe, but entropy. Is it just entropy that anything starts off simple? This is a very generic definition of entropy. Starts off simple, gets complicated, and ends. Everything entropy follows that path. Eventually our sun is going to burn itself out, right? It starts off perfect, right? Starts off simple, couple of gases compressed, gravity's there, boom, you have the sun, but it ends in a very bad situation, right? That's entropy, right? And you move into a house, you have your son or daughter, They move into a room with no furniture in it. It's clean. Look at your child's bedroom in a year. That's entropy, right? It starts off one way and ends in a mess. Is that the human race? Is that just something that we started off simple, living in caves, and we've built this complicated thing, and energy has got to go somewhere, and it's just entropy and the way that the world works. As scary of a statement as that is, that's the second law of thermodynamics in physics. And maybe it's just something that we're not meant to control. That's the other thing. It's just weird to me. It's a weird feeling. We can talk about it, but eventually entropy will take over, whether it's in 1,000 years, 10,000 years, or the internet or an EMP could end everything tomorrow.
It could. It absolutely could. The atmosphere is quite damaged. If we have a Carrington type event right now, a CME like the Carrington event, that would shut down grids around the globe. Again, nuclear plants can't cool themselves. Fukushima times several hundred, game over. So from every conceivable direction, we have truly painted ourselves into an unimaginably dark corner. And the planet is heating right now, by the way, if I can put this into mathematical context. The planet is heating and the oceans have absorbed most of this heat, but now that equation is changing and they're releasing it into the atmosphere. They can't hold it anymore. But the thermal energy equivalent of the heat contained in 7 Hiroshima nuclear bombs per second. The thermal energy equivalent that the planet is heating at right now, 7 Hiroshima bombs per second. I encourage your listeners not to believe me. Please look that up. It's not disputed, and that is likely a conservative figure. So again, we have oceans warming to this degree, and we're seeing ocean temperatures in some places, Jimmy, 25 degrees above normal. It's spiked in some of the polar regions. That's inconceivable. I mean, the creatures that evolved there cannot live in that kind of temperature change. So, and at the same time, we have the mass distraction happening, just like with the Odysseus probe that just crash landed on the moon that we're told was a success, and we have no way of seeing it or verifying it. Does it seem odd, Jimmy, to you and to your listeners that we're told we were driving EV dune buggies around on the moon routinely 50 plus years ago, and now we can't go back? Does that strike anybody as being a bit odd? And a NASA representative, I don't know if you've seen this, but stating on the record that we lost the technology to go to the moon? Really? And their film footage of the moon landings, they taped over it because the film reels were expensive and nobody was watching it, so we just taped over it? Really? So all I'm trying to say, I'm not giving a conclusion, I'm just saying, when will people start to question everything? Everything. We're sinking in a sea of lies. They accept the official narrative that this is just condensation we see in our skies. Really? We have film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. Condensation doesn't fan out and cover the whole sky like an opaque, filthy layer. That's not condensation. That's a particulate trail. And so, again, where does reason start to kick in? That we've been spoon-fed lies from birth to death. And if we don't start questioning that now and standing against it, the pitchforks and torches moment, this story is about to end poorly, as you stated.
Yeah, except, yes, and you're 100% correct on everything. But I will add this, that where it's different today than it's ever been in human history. Today, the man can't control the sharing of information like they used to. They used to be able to control everything. And there was a time before television. Right, there was that's a new invention. Today, we are able to, and unless stuff gets diverted, we are able to share information quicker and faster. And that's the element that the man cannot control. Not like in the past, printed materials, radio waves, and all. But for the last 5,000 years, all of the information has been controlled. That's it. It's been nothing but dogma. You're absolutely right. Today, though, we are able to communicate and share information like never before. I'm talking about 2024. This is all new. So we are able to do and share this like what you and I are doing right now. And the work that you're doing, you're able to share that. You couldn't do that 50 years ago. You would have to be handing flyers out on the street, Dane.
Yes, I agree. And we should make the most of that while we can, because you know and I know they can shut that down anytime they choose, and they can level the playing field anytime they choose. Again, as I mentioned earlier, what's in our air mix, if they feel they're really losing control, two of those elements, polymer fibers and graphene, used militarily for biological warfare as biological carrier agents, they are in our reign now. We have the world's second most recognized geoengineer, Dr. Ken Caldera, former DoD scientist, stating on the record. We own the audio of him stating this. One of the things he did for the DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the population below. Why would we think they wouldn't resort to this when, according to the Washington Post, even as of 1977, the U.S. military had already conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests over innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians? Why would we think it's not ongoing now? So they can level the playing field anytime they want. And although we can get data out, as you stated, geoengineeringwatch.org, because of our site traffic, which is now 46 million, I believe, and counting, we were the top of the first page on a search of the geoengineering term. About 3 years ago, literally overnight, Google disappeared us. Very hard to find geoengineering data on Google. So they are trying to sweep us under the rug as much as they can. But I do agree with you, Jimmy. Without this form of communication, we would be dead in the water. But since we have this, it's up to all of us to put it to use, to mail links like to the dimming. We encourage people, because that is such a complete expose of climate engineering with indisputable proof. Land that link in the laps. Doesn't cost anything to do this. Send that link to local meteorologists, to elected officials, to farm groups, to ag groups. Help us to circulate that most powerful tool.
The main thing, with everything that I do, everything, and Dane, you do the same thing, but it's, you know what? Collect the information, use discernment, and go and do research and figure things out on your own. That's the best. That's the number one. And you have all the tools at your disposal. So go and do that. And Dane, you said it earlier. I loved it. Don't believe me. Just go and look for yourself. You don't have, and that's exactly the point. Leave it up to everybody else. You and I aren't judge or jury. Right? Hopefully history is going to show us on the right side of the fence, right? and we'll have that going for us. But the other part is just the dogma and everything else that has come down at us over the years. That's fine. But just take everything in its totality and go and do your research. We're talking about it now. It's never been more forward and out front in the past like it is today. And that's what we have to do. We can't get comfortable. We can't relax. And the data that I gave out earlier about the world's population doubling since 1980, 81, since I graduated high school, is a frightening number. And it's like 1 billion a year, right? That's where we're at now.
It is.
1 billion.
You're so correct. To bring that up, I so salute you for bringing that up. And so many people, because they heard someone somewhere say that there's plenty of elbow room left on the planet and everything's fine, they don't investigate from that standpoint. And that's exactly what you're describing. That needs to change. So people dump their preconceptions, their biases, their programming, re-examine everything you thought was so based on diligent, objective investigation. Clear the lens through which you see the world, and you'll see it for the first time. And we are in a very dark corner. And the only way out of that corner is to look through a clear lens.
Thank you so much, Dane. And now, geoengineeringwatch.org is right there. When somebody goes over, where would you guide them first as they start their research into this?
Well, our weekly 55-minute commercial-free, non-political update is a good start. Global Alert News has posted in the recent column And beyond that, we have categories of whatever they want to search: jet spraying, engineering winter, engineering wildfires. We do have categories at the top of the toolbar. It's a big site. We have a lot of data. But the dimming is a great place to start. That is the most comprehensive one-stop tutorial on climate engineering. We posted that. We spent way under six figures making that film, Jimmy. We posted it for free the day it was done. We've not monetized anything. My only goal, if I spent my whole retirement on this, I will use every resource I have. We have to stop this, or nothing else will matter. No other causes or concerns will matter. So the dimming, go there, and the weekly update, Global Alert News, great places to start.
The Dimming is an amazing film, everybody. So I encourage everybody, geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane, keep rolling that rock uphill, my brother. Don't ever stop.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for your voice in this all-important battle. Thank you for all you do.
The very best, Dane Wigington. Thank you so much, Dane. And again, website links are below, geoengineeringwatch.org. We've got them over on our website. We have it throughout social media. And do go and check out the documentary, The Dimming. It is absolutely amazing. And with that, that not only ends tonight's show, and I told everybody it's sobering, and it's an education. Tonight was amazing. Thank you, Dane. And tomorrow night, right here on Fade to Black, we have Dr. Paul Sutter with us. He is a professional astronomer. And just like tonight's show with Dane, tomorrow night, it's exoplanets, the universe, the knowledge, astronomers, astrophysics, physics. Okay, that's great, the science of it. But what is really getting to us, and how is society informed, and what are we doing with that information? All of that and much more tomorrow night with Dr. Paul Sutter. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John Aside. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll see you tomorrow night with Dr. Paul Sutter. Until then, I want you to be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.